Claire Benson never imagined that kindness could one day feel like betrayal. The air in Bend had turned crisp with November-yellowed birch leaves fluttered across the sidewalk as Claire locked the front door of her townhouse. A chill worked its way under the collar of her wool coat, but she welcomed it. It kept her alert, reminded her of the change in season. Saturdays were reserved for little rituals, the post office at 9, a quick stop at Pine and Cone Grocery, and on rare occasions like this, a quiet moment to prepare something special. Inside the post office, the bell above the door gave its usual tinny ring. Ed, the clerk with the stoop and kindly mustache, looked up from his sorting table. "Well, Miss Claire," he said, smiling, still refusing to go digital. Claire chuckled as she handed over a padded box wrapped in brown paper. "Some things deserve a stamp, Ed. The real kind. Ink and adhesive." He tapped the corner of the parcel. "Fancy wrapping wedding for my brother Derek espresso machine. He always said coffee was sacred." Ed winked. "I'll make sure it gets there sacred and safe." She waved and stepped back into the cold. The streets still bore decorations from the town's small harvest festival, hay bales, corn stalks tied to lampposts, a wooden turkey that had begun to tilt sideways after a recent gust. She smiled softly, then turned and walked home. Back in her kitchen, she placed the remaining pieces of the gift basket in order: the sleek stainless steel espresso machine, a bag of imported beans, a photo book she'd compiled with childhood pictures, and a simple card that read, "Congratulations, Derek and Maria, from all of us." She had signed all their names, Julie's looping cursive, Travis's hurried scrawl, even her parents'. None had chipped in and none had offered. It didn't matter, or at least she told herself it didn't. Claire slid the card into the envelope, sealed it with a touch more force than necessary, and set everything neatly in the car. That evening, the rehearsal dinner unfolded at their parents' house. The smell of overcooked ham clung to the furniture. Claire found herself in her usual seat next to the window, the seat furthest from the kitchen but closest to the hallway where she could make a quick exit if needed. Julie poured wine with theatrical flourish and said, "You're so lucky, Claire. No kids, no college funds, no mortgages, just your cute condo and your perfect little espresso." Her voice dripped sugar. "It must be nice not having responsibilities." Claire smiled, thin and worn. "Nice is relative," their mother Virginia chimed in. "We're just saying it's generous of you to handle the gift. You've always been so capable. It suits you." Travis nodded as if the matter were settled. "Exactly. It's not like you need much anyway." The conversation drifted elsewhere, but Claire remained still. She stared at her untouched glass of Merlot, letting the ambient clatter of plates and laughter wrap around her like gauze, warm, distant, and just thick enough to dull the sting. Later that night at the wedding reception, she watched Derek twirl his new bride under a canopy of fairy lights. Maria looked radiant. Derek, bashful and beaming, had tears in his eyes during their first dance. Claire stood at the edge of the crowd, her hands clasped heart-full and oddly hollow all at once. He had hugged her briefly before the ceremony, whispered, "Thanks for everything, Claire." Seriously, but hadn't mentioned the gift no one had. She lingered until the dancing gave way to drinking, until the cake had been cut and sliced and mostly eaten. Her parents were locked in quiet conversation with the Sloanes, who were bragging about Maria's ring to anyone who'd listen. Claire stepped away, retrieved her coat, and slipped out into the cool night. In the car, she rubbed her arms and turned on the ignition. Before pulling out of the lot, she opened her phone, mostly to distract herself from the silence. A banking notification sat on the screen. Unread. Curiosity piqued. She tapped her retirement account. The balance seemed off. Her brows furrowed. She refreshed the app. The number held steady. Maybe I'm tired, she thought. Maybe I'm misremembering. She drove home with the heat on low and the radio tuned to the station that played soft piano after midnight. Back in her kitchen, she removed her earrings, set them in the ceramic bowl on the counter, and folded her coat over the chair like she always did. She brushed her teeth, wrote a quick list for Sunday errands, and placed it on the fridge beneath a magnet shaped like an owl. The house was still. Only the hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of wood settled behind her. At 2:00 a.m., just as she was about to switch off the lamp beside her bed, her phone vibrated. She reached for it, blinking through sleep. The message read, $4,000 transferred to account, ending in 74XX, $8,400 had vanished, and the only thing more shocking was how easily her family explained it away. Sunlight spilled across the hardwood floor of Claire's living room, filtered through lace curtains that danced gently in the late morning breeze. She had intended to take a walk, maybe stop by the bookstore before lunch, but the uneasy weight in her chest hadn't lifted since the night before. That number still echoed in her mind. $4,000 gone. She told herself it was a mistake, a bank error, maybe a delayed transaction. Something explainable. Still in her robe, Claire sat at her dining table with a mug of coffee, black and growing cold. She opened her retirement account app again, her thumb hovering hesitant. One tap and the dashboard unfolded in front of her. The number didn't lie. Her balance was down, $8,400. She moved to the transaction history first line, $2,000 payment, Julie Sloan credit card, next, $4,000 transfer to Travis Sloan Enterprises, then $400 direct deposit, Virginia Benson. Her stomach clenched. Claire rubbed her temple, setting the mug aside. The transactions had cleared the night of the wedding. Her pulse picked up. Fingers trembling, she dialed Julie. Her sister picked up after the third ring, her voice chipper. "Claire, you get home safe last night?" "I did," Claire replied evenly. "Julie, did you authorize a transfer from my retirement account?" A pause. "Oh, that. Yeah, I thought we'd talk about it over brunch or something." Claire closed her eyes. "Brunch, Claire," Julie said, as if scolding a child. "You always help. You always say you're not even planning to retire early. We just took a little spread the load. It's for the family. You took over $8,000. You're overreacting. I mean, you make good money. You don't have kids." Claire ended the call before the knot in her throat could twist tighter. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The ceiling fan turned slowly, casting soft shadows that moved like water. The next call was harder. Virginia answered with a familiar, measured tone. "Hello, sweetheart." "Mom?" Claire said carefully. "I saw a deposit to your account. From mine." "Did you know about that?" Virginia sighed. "Julie said she was handling things. I thought it would be easier that way. We figured you wouldn't mind." Claire didn't speak. Her mother continued. "It's not like it's gone dear. It's just been repurposed. Derek's wedding, a few needs here and there. I didn't authorize it. We're family. We've always shared." Claire ended the call, her hand resting heavily on the phone. She dressed without thinking, her movements mechanical jeans, a blue sweater scarf. She slipped on flats and her navy coat. On the drive to Rosewood Diner, she didn't turn on the radio. The streets of Bend were calm, blanketed in mid-autumn stillness. A few kids rode bikes with scarves trailing. A black lab waited patiently outside the bookstore tied to a bike rack. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped into the diner. The smell of baked pie and brewed coffee enveloped her like a memory. A waitress she'd known for years looked up from the counter and smiled. "Still tipping $2, hon," she called, already reaching for the pot. Claire smiled faintly. "Some things don't change." She took a seat in her usual booth by the window, sliding into the worn red leather. Condensation streaked the glass, framing her reflection in soft lines. A moment later, Mark arrived. Tall, quiet in demeanor, wrapped in a tweed overcoat, he brought a presence that didn't announce itself, but anchored everything around it. He slid into the booth opposite her. "You sounded off." Claire pushed her phone across the table. "I wasn't sure who else to call." Mark picked up the phone, tapped through her retirement app. Brows furrowing. "The transactions happened Saturday night," Claire murmured. "While I was at the wedding." Mark scrolled slowly. "They accessed your account. I think Julie did. I never told anyone the password, but I've used the same one for years." The waitress returned with coffee and a slice of pumpkin pie. Claire didn't touch hers. Mark's fingers tapped the table once, then stilled. "This isn't just wrong," he said finally. "It's criminal." Claire looked down at her coffee, her throat tightened. "I don't know what to do," she said. "If I confront them, they'll say, I'm making a fuss. If I do nothing, they'll do it again." Mark folded his hands. "You don't need to shout. You don't even need to be angry, but you need to act." She blinked. "Against my own family." He nodded slowly. "If someone at work had done this to you, you'd already be calling the police," Claire whispered. "They're my family," Mark replied softly. "And they're counting on that. Some boundaries are made of stone, others drawn in trembling chalk." Claire stood at the foot of her parents' porch steps, staring at the scuffed welcome mat. The maple trees flanking the house had lost most of their leaves, revealing spindly branches that scratched lightly against the windows when the breeze passed. She gripped the casserole dish tighter than she needed to. It was her ticket in a peace offering. Though she wasn't here for peace, she hadn't called ahead. That was deliberate. She wanted to see them unguarded, not rehearsed. As she climbed the steps and knocked twice, she heard the muffled hum of conversation and the unmistakable clink of silverware. Brunch as always. Harold opened the door with the same expression he wore at Sunday service, neutral, unreadable. He stepped aside without a word. Claire entered and was immediately hit by the familiar scent of stale coffee, maple syrup, and lemon furniture polish. Julie looked up from her seat in the kitchen, a fork midair. "Well," she said brightly, "if it isn't the prodigal sister." "We weren't expecting guests." "I didn't come to eat," Claire replied. Travis leaned back in his chair, one arm draped across the seat beside him. "You're making a scene already, Claire. At least let us finish our eggs." Virginia bustled out from the pantry, her apron lightly dusted with flour. "Claire, sweetheart," she said with forced cheer. "What brings you by?" Claire placed the dish on the countertop. "We need to talk," the room quieted. The old wall clock ticked loudly in the silence. Each second pronounced, the wallpaper behind the table had started to peel slightly at the corners, its floral pattern faded, like a memory overstayed. She turned to Julie. "You accessed my retirement account." Julie didn't blink. "You always use the same password." "It wasn't hard." Claire's stomach tightened. She looked to Travis, who was sipping orange juice. "It's only money," he said, as if that settled everything. "You'll make it back." "It's not about making it back," Claire replied. Julie rolled her eyes. "You're acting like we robbed a bank. You've always helped Claire. You're better off than all of us. No kids, no debts, a quiet little life." Claire's voice wavered, but only for a moment. "It wasn't yours to take." Virginia moved toward her concern, etched on her brow. "We just didn't think you'd make such a big deal. We're family. We share things. We don't steal things." Virginia flinched. "Sweetheart, don't shame us like this. We thought you understood." From the hallway, Derek appeared briefly, hands in his pockets, eyes wide. He said nothing. Claire turned to Harold, who hadn't spoken once. He stared into his coffee cup, then looked up. Maybe he said, voice low and cold, "You don't belong here anymore." The words struck like a slap, not loud but sharp. Claire felt her breath catch. Her fingers trembled around the edge of the counter. She spotted her teacup on the Hutch white porcelain with a green rim, the one she'd used every visit since college. She wondered if they'd throw it out next. "I came here to hear the truth," she said, straightening. "And I have." Julie crossed her arms. "You're blowing this way out of proportion." "You didn't borrow," Claire said, steady now. "You stole." No one moved. The only sound was the tick-tick-tick of the clock behind her. She turned and walked out, her shoes silent on the worn wood floor. As the door closed behind her, the cool air hit her cheeks, and for a moment she thought she might cry. But the tears didn't come. She walked to her car slowly, her coat catching the wind. Leaves swirled around her boots, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked mess, then fell silent. She reached for the door handle, paused, and looked back at the house. The windows were still. No one watched her leave. She leaves the house, tears threatening, but something inside her hardens instead. Justice doesn't knock. It waits at the door, quiet with paperwork in hand. The fog had settled thick over Bend by morning, blurring the outlines of trees and muffling the sounds of a town not yet fully awake. Claire stood in her home office, wrapped in her knit cardigan, holding a cup of lukewarm coffee she hadn't taken a sip from. Her dining table had been transformed into a battlefield of documents, bank statements, emails, text message screenshots, and a lined notebook filled with color-coded tabs. A yellow legal pad sat at the center, scrawled with figures and notes in her tidy handwriting. She stared at the pages and their cold precision. $300 here, $750 there. Altogether, the number had crept up with disturbing ease, just under $15,000 over 3 years. She had never added it all up before. Not until Mark had told her gently but clearly that documentation was the most powerful language in law. A V formation of geese passed slowly overhead, barely visible through the misted window. Claire watched them a moment, silent, orderly, committed to their destination. Her father had once admired them for that very trait. "Even birds know when to keep in line," he used to say. The knock on the door came at precisely 9. Mark stepped in, brushing fog droplets off his coat. He carried a leather briefcase and a reusable coffee cup. "Ready?" he asked. Claire nodded. "As I'll ever be." The drive to the County Financial Crimes Division passed mostly in silence, the quiet filled with the sound of windshield wipers and occasional breath. Claire stared at the fog weaving between pine trees lining the road. The landscape she had known her whole life looked different now, less quaint, more uncertain. The office was tucked behind the courthouse low brick walls, a painted sign above the door and windows that looked out on a shared parking lot. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old coffee and laminate flooring. The front desk clerk, a woman with round glasses and a pale green sweater, guided them to a small conference room. Detective Karen Holt entered a few minutes later. She was in her 50s, short-cropped gray hair, a calm presence. She shook Claire's hand firmly, then offered her a seat. Her notepad looked worn but well kept, its corners softened with time. "I understand. This is difficult," she said. "But I'm here to listen." Claire nodded and began, voice low but steady. She walked Holt through the timeline, starting with the wedding. The notification at 2 a.m., the discovery of the transactions. Holt asked thoughtful questions but didn't interrupt. Mark only spoke to clarify technical points, allowing Claire to take the lead. When they reached the part about the 3-year history, Claire pushed forward the spreadsheet she had printed the night before. These weren't one-time gifts, she said. They became expected. Demanded. Holt glanced over the documents, then looked up. This falls well within the scope of financial abuse, especially as it involves a retirement account. A chime sounded as Leanne Ramirez joined the meeting via Zoom. Her face appeared on a laptop screen at the edge of the table, framed by a bookshelf behind her. "I've reviewed the case summary," she said, nodding toward Claire. "This isn't just theft. It's betrayal wrapped in familiarity." Claire let those words settle in the room. Something about hearing it aloud, someone calling it what it was, brought clarity. Detective Holt asked, "Are you prepared to move forward formally?" Claire hesitated for half a second, then reached for the pen laid in front of her. She signed the complaint. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice did not. "Yes, I'm ready." Mark gave a small nod beside her. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet affirmation. As they left the building, the fog had lifted slightly. The air still held a chill, but the visibility had returned. Claire inhaled deeply and felt for the first time in days the absence of weight in her chest. That night she slept soundly. No lists in her head, no calculations, no messages to pre-write in case someone called. Just sleep. The next morning, the sound of gravel under shoes stirred her before the doorbell did. Claire stepped to the front door, still in her robe, a second cup of coffee in hand. She opened it slowly. Julie stood on the porch, her eyes swollen, mascara smudged, hands clenched around her phone. Next morning, Claire opens the door and finds Julie standing on her porch with tears in her eyes. Sometimes the ones you confront the hardest are the ones you once made room for at your dinner table. The November rain had settled in early and stubborn, tapping softly at Claire's windows and streaking the panes in thin gray ribbons. Inside the house smelled faintly of cloves and rosemary, though the oven had long gone quiet. Claire sat on the couch with a folded throw blanket beside her and a book she hadn't managed to open all morning. Her thoughts looped endlessly last night's doorbell. Julie on the porch, tears in her eyes, but no real remorse in her words. "You've changed," Julie had whispered. "You're not our Claire anymore." Claire had stood in the doorway, arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Maybe I finally found who I really am," she'd replied. Julie hadn't answered. She just turned and walked back into the drizzle. Now, as the sky hung low and heavy outside, Claire stood in the kitchen preparing her first Thanksgiving alone. She roasted a small turkey breast with herbs, boiled sweet potatoes for mashing, and laid out the last piece of her grandmother's pumpkin pie from the freezer, real silverware cloth napkins. Even the amber glasses her mother used for company. It wasn't for show. She just needed the ritual to feel real. The recipe cards lay in their tin box on the counter, corners worn soft. She glanced at the handwriting. Virginia's neat cursive on the pecan pie card, Harold's blocky print on the gravy instructions from a clipping decades ago. They felt like fossils now, pieces from another life. There was a knock. Claire wiped her hands on a towel and opened the door. Evelyn stood there in her raincoat, a foil-covered dish in her gloved hands. Dean stood just behind her umbrella, tucked under one arm. "We didn't want you to eat alone this year," Evelyn said with a gentle smile. "Apple tart? Still warm?" Claire blinked back, a sudden sting behind her eyes. "Would you like to come in?" "Oh no, sweetheart," Dean said. "We've got our own mess across the street, but we just wanted you to know we're proud of you." Evelyn nodded, then glanced at Dean, who added softly, "Took me years to tell my daughter no, even longer to believe I was allowed to." After they left, Claire returned to the kitchen, sliced a piece of the tart, and added it to her plate. She lit 2 candles, turned on the radio, jazz as always, and sat down at the table. The turkey was tender, the sweet potatoes creamy. She ate slowly, quietly. No one interrupted her. No one demanded anything. For the first time in years, she breathed deeply, not out of exhaustion but peace. That evening, Derek called. "Can I come by?" He arrived carrying a box of old records Claire had loaned him years ago. He set them down like a peace offering. His eyes were tired. "I wanted to say something earlier," he began, "at Mom and Dad's. But I didn't know how." Claire waited. "I heard Julie and Travis talking. Back in October, they were planning the whole thing. The money, the transfers. They even joked about using the wedding to shift some numbers quietly." "I should have said something sooner. You were scared," Claire said softly. He looked at her. "Yeah, but I'm not anymore. I'll testify." Claire touched his hand. "That means more than you know." They sat for a few minutes, neither speaking. Outside, the wind knocked gently against the siding. The house was still, but not empty. The next morning, the phone rang just after Claire finished washing the last dish. She recognized the number immediately. "Detective Holt," she answered. "They've been charged," Holt said. "Court date's been set." Sometimes family is found in a courtroom, and sometimes at the edge of a quiet lake. The Bend County Courthouse sat squarely under a cloudless December sky, its limestone facade glowing faintly in the morning light. Claire arrived early, her breath visible in the crisp air, her coat buttoned to the throat. Mark walked beside her in silence, carrying a slim briefcase Derek trailed behind, hands in his pockets, eyes focused on the courthouse steps. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Inside the courtroom, warmth from the heating system buzzed quietly overhead. The wood-paneled walls and heavy curtains gave the room the feel of something older than the town itself. Like justice here had been handed out long before any of them had been born. Julie and Travis sat at the defense table, stiff in their clothes. Julie's makeup was minimal, her eyes dark with fatigue. Travis didn't look up. Claire noticed the slight tremor in Julie's hand as she reached for a tissue, though her face remained hard. Virginia and Harold sat on the bench behind them, rigid. Virginia clutched her purse like it might be snatched away. Harold stared ahead, his gaze never drifting to the side of the room where Claire sat. The judge entered and proceedings began. There were statements, procedural confirmations, terms outlined in careful legal language, probation, restitution, a 3-year restraining order. Claire heard the words but felt them more than understood them. A dull thud of punctuation after a long, difficult sentence. Then it was her turn. She stepped forward, clasping the small paper she'd written on that morning. Not a speech. Just a few lines scribbled while the coffee brewed and the sun lit up her kitchen window. "Kindness," she said, her voice steady, "is not an obligation. It's a choice, and I choose differently now." There were no gasps, no rebuttals. The judge gave a single nod, and that was that. Outside, the sun had begun to descend toward the mountains, casting long golden fingers across the snow-dusted pavement. Claire stood on the steps a moment, letting the cold bite her cheeks. That evening they drove to Sparks Lake. Mark's parents, Helen and Robert, had packed a basket with soup rolls and hot cider. They laid out a blanket near the dock, bundled in coats and scarves. Claire sat between Mark and Derek, sipping from a thermos, listening to Robert tell a story about falling into this very lake back in the 70s while trying to impress Helen with a canoe. Laughter flowed easier than she expected. Not loud or wild, but warm, genuine, like a fire catching gently on kindling. Later, as the sun dropped low behind the trees, Mark turned to her. His gloved hand reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small silver key on a plain ring. "No pressure," he said softly. "But this is to our life, if you want it." Claire looked at him, then at the key, then back again. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just nodded, a breath of air leaving her lips like the final leaf from a tree after a long autumn. They packed up slowly, the quiet of the lake filling the spaces between words. At home, Claire walked to the front porch, her scarf wrapped around her shoulders, one Helen had knitted and pressed into her hands as they said goodbye. The mailbox. An old metal one she had meant to replace but never did, creaked as she opened it. Inside was an envelope addressed in unfamiliar handwriting. She carried it inside, unwrapped her scarf, and sat down with a fresh cup of tea. Carefully, she opened the letter. The handwriting was graceful, a little shaky. "You don't know me, but I know your story, and I needed it. Thank you for standing up, because now I can too." On a quiet December evening with snow beginning to collect on the porch railings, Claire discovered something far more lasting than justice peace. What began with betrayal led her not only to truth, but to a deeper understanding of the family we choose and the courage it takes to say enough kindness when freely given is powerful, but when claimed by force, it loses its name. And yet, even in that loss, the quiet strength to reclaim it can light the way, like the flicker of a porch light in winter. Even the smallest act of standing up for yourself can become a beacon for others. And perhaps somewhere close to home, someone is watching, waiting for the sign that they too can begin again.